The shuttle landed at the Kethris Institute just as the twin suns began to set. Orange and purple light spread across the massive buildings of the most famous military academy in the entire galaxy. Students from 100 different worlds walked across the grounds, wearing perfect uniforms, carrying expensive equipment, speaking with the confidence of people who knew they were important. Nobody noticed the young human who stepped off the shuttle with a single worn bag over his shoulder. Elias Vance kept his head down as he walked toward the dormitory. His clothes were simple and slightly too big for him. His dark hair fell across his forehead, partly hiding his eyes. He moved like someone trying very hard not to be seen, stepping aside whenever anyone came near, mumbling apologies even when he had done nothing wrong. A group of Dexian students walked past him, their blue skins shimmering in the fading light. They did not even glance at him. A massive Kelani warrior, nearly 8 feet tall with 4 arms, had to stop suddenly to avoid walking into Elias. The warrior made a sound of annoyance and continued on without a word. Elias was used to this. He preferred it, actually. Being invisible was safe. Being noticed was dangerous. He found his dormitory room after getting lost twice and having to ask for directions 3 times. The room was small but clean, with a single bed, a desk, and a window that looked out over the training fields. His roommate had not arrived yet, which was a relief. Elias sat on the bed and let out a long breath. For a moment, just a moment, his eyes changed. The nervous, uncertain look disappeared. Something harder and colder took its place. Something that had seen battles that burned across entire star systems. Something that had made decisions that killed millions. Then he blinked, and the moment passed, and he was just a scared young man again. The neural dampeners in his brain were working. They kept the memories locked away. They kept him safe from himself. 3 floors up, and in a much larger room, Kira Selin was unpacking her belongings with the help of 2 service robots. Her room had a private bathroom, a sitting area, and windows on 3 walls. This was appropriate for someone of her status. Her father was High Admiral Selin of the Dexian Combined Fleet. Her mother had been a planetary governor before her death. Kira had been raised to command, to lead, to never show weakness. She was tall for a Dexian, with the deep blue skin and silver eyes of her people. Her movements were precise and confident. When she spoke, people listened. When she gave orders, people obeyed. Her communication device beeped. She glanced at it and frowned. A message from the Academy administration informed her that a new student had been added to her training squad. A human. A transfer student with no notable family connections and average test scores. Kira deleted the message with a flick of her finger. She would deal with this inconvenience later. Down in the common area of Dormitory Block 7, Varath was arm wrestling with 3 other students at once and winning easily. The Kelani warrior caste student had come to Kethris to prove that his people's ancient traditions of combat were still relevant in an age of starships and energy weapons. So far, nobody had given him a real challenge. Marcus Chun watched from a nearby couch, trying to hide his annoyance. He was human, like the new transfer student, but that was where the similarities ended. Marcus came from a wealthy Earth family with 3 generations of military service. He had trained since childhood for this academy. He had earned his place here through skill and determination. He had heard rumors about the new human student. Apparently, the guy could barely make eye contact with anyone. He had almost failed the physical entrance exam. He seemed to be afraid of everything. Marcus felt his jaw tighten with anger. Humans had fought hard to earn respect in the Galactic Union. They were newcomers compared to species like the Vexians and Kalani, who had traveled between stars for thousands of years. Every human at Kethris carried the weight of their entire species' reputation. And now this nervous, pathetic transfer student was going to make them all look weak. The first week of classes confirmed everyone's expectations. Elias Vance was, by all appearances, completely unremarkable. He sat in the back of every classroom. He never raised his hand. When instructors called on him, he would stammer out answers that were technically correct but delivered with so little confidence that they sounded wrong. In physical training, he was always last. Not because he was slow or weak, exactly, but because he seemed to hold himself back. He would start to move with surprising speed, then suddenly stop, as if catching himself doing something he should not do. The combat simulations were the worst. Every time weapons fire started, even the fake weapons fire of training programs, Elias would freeze. His face would go pale. His hands would shake. Once, he had to leave the simulation room entirely, and everyone heard him being sick in the hallway bathroom. Kira watched all of this with growing irritation. This human had been assigned to her squad, which meant his failures reflected on her leadership. She considered requesting his removal, but decided against it. Removing him would suggest that she could not handle a difficult team member. Instead, she simply ignored him, giving him the smallest possible tasks and expecting nothing. Varath actually felt sorry for the human. The Kalani people respected strength, but they also respected struggle. This small human was clearly struggling with something, some inner battle that Varath could not understand. Once, Varath tried to offer Elias some advice about combat stance, but the human flinched away from him so violently that Varath decided not to try again. Marcus Chun refused to speak to Elias at all. Every time he saw his fellow human stumble or stammer, Marcus felt personally insulted. He worked twice as hard in every training session, determined to prove that not all humans were like this. And Elias? Elias was grateful for being ignored. He went to his classes, did his work, and returned to his room. He ate alone in the corner of the dining hall. He studied alone in the back of the library. He did everything he could to be small and quiet and forgettable. At night, he would sometimes wake up screaming. The dreams were always the same: fire and darkness. Thousands of ships burning. Millions of voices crying out. And his own voice, calm and steady, giving orders that would kill more people than most planets had ever held. In the dreams, he was not afraid. In the dreams, he was something terrible and powerful and completely in control. He would wake up with tears on his face and spend the rest of the night sitting by his window, watching the stars and trying not to remember. Because Elias Vance had a secret so dangerous that the government of Earth had built walls inside his own mind to contain it. He was not just a transfer student. He was Admiral Elias Vance, the Silent Hammer, the man who had won the Scourge, War, the greatest tactical mind humanity had ever produced. And he was hiding at Kethris because if he ever became that person again, he was afraid of what he might do. 3 months passed at the Kethris Institute. The leaves on the campus trees changed from green to gold to deep red. Students settled into routines of classes, training, and the endless competition for ranking and recognition. Elias Vance remained invisible, a ghost moving through the halls, noticed by no one. But strange things had started to happen. Small things. Things that made Kira Salem pay attention. It began during a navigation exercise. The simulation put their squad on a damaged ship drifting through an asteroid field. They had to plot a course to safety using only backup systems. Everyone was shouting different ideas. Marcus wanted to go left. Vorath wanted to punch through the densest part of the field using the ship's remaining shields. The Narration twins, identical Valaxian students with 4 eyes each, were calculating trajectories that would take too long. Elias was sitting in the corner, as usual, pretending to study a screen that showed the asteroid positions. He was not supposed to be part of the main discussion. His job was to monitor hull integrity, a task so simple that even he could not fail at it. Then he mumbled something. Kira almost did not hear it. "What did you say?" Elias looked up, startled, like a small animal caught in light. "Nothing. Sorry. It was nothing. You said something about Vector 12. His face went red. I noticed that if you adjust the entry angle by 3 degrees on Vector 12, and then cut engines for exactly 4 seconds at the midpoint, the gravitational pull from the 2 largest asteroids will actually push you through the gap instead of into it. You would save fuel and time. But I am probably wrong. Sorry." Everyone stared at him. Kira turned to the Narration twins, who were already running the numbers. Their 4 eyes blinked in unison. "He is correct," they said together. "The solution is optimal. We did not see it." The instructor, an old Bexian commander who had seen 100 years of space travel, replayed the simulation 3 times. Each time, Elias's solution worked perfectly. It was not just good. It was elegant. It was the kind of solution that should not come from a failing student who could barely hold a conversation. Elias spent the rest of the day hiding in the library, horrified at himself. More incidents followed. During a supply chain management exercise, Elias turned in his assignment late, as usual. The instructor almost did not bother to read it. But when she did, she found that his seemingly random suggestions for supply routes and storage allocation were better than the solutions produced by the Academy's advanced AI systems. The computer took 6 hours to verify that he was right. In a history class about famous naval battles, the instructor asked students to identify mistakes made by commanders in ancient wars. Most students gave obvious answers. Elias, when called on unexpectedly, stammered out a 12-point analysis of how a battle from 300 years ago could have been won with half the casualties. His voice was barely above a whisper, and he apologized 4 times during his answer. But the content was extraordinary. The instructor, who had written books on that very battle, had never considered 3 of those 12 points. Kira began to watch Elias more carefully. She noticed things that others missed. The way his eyes would sometimes change, becoming focused and intense before he caught himself and looked away. The way his hands would twitch toward invisible controls during combat footage, as if he was used to commanding things that were not there. The way he seemed to know exactly where everyone in a room was standing at all times. Even when he appeared to be staring at the floor. Something was very wrong with this picture. Elias Vance was hiding something. She was not the only one who was paying attention. Far beyond the Kethra system, in the cold darkness between galaxies, something ancient was waking up. The Void Collective had been silent for 15 years. The galaxy believed them destroyed, broken at the Battle of Cygnus Reach by a human fleet that should have lost. But the Collective was not a species. It was a consciousness, a vast intelligence that spread across millions of connected minds. And consciousness, unlike bodies, was very hard to kill. The new Overmind had spent 15 years rebuilding in secret. New ships, new soldiers, new plans. But more than anything, the Overmind had spent those years searching for the one who had hurt them so badly. The human commander who had turned their greatest victory into their greatest defeat. They called him the Silent Hammer. The Void Collective had learned his name from captured transmissions, from terrified survivors, from the screaming wreckage of their own fleet. Admiral Elias Vance, a young human barely out of childhood who had somehow seen through every trap, countered every strategy, and destroyed their previous Overmind with a final attack of such brutal precision that it still echoed in their collective memory like a wound that would not heal. They had thought he was dead. Humans did not live long, and their reports said he had been damaged by the war, his mind broken by the strain of commanding so many ships through direct neural interface. But then their agents found something. A sealed file in the Turan military database. A transfer order to an academy called Kethris. A photograph of a thin young man with haunted eyes and a familiar face. The silent hammer was alive, and he was hiding among children. The Overmind felt something that might have been joy. If such a vast and alien intelligence could feel joy, they would find him. They would make him watch as they destroyed everything around him. And then, slowly, they would take him apart, piece by piece, until they understood how a single human had defeated them. They began to move their fleet toward Kethris. Back at the academy, Elias was sitting alone in his room, staring at his hands. They were shaking again. They always shook after he let something slip. After he allowed a tiny piece of the person he used to be to surface. The neural dampeners were supposed to prevent this. They were supposed to keep the Admiral locked away, buried under layers of chemical and technological barriers. But lately, he could feel them weakening. Every time he saw a tactical problem, every time his mind automatically started calculating solutions, the walls cracked a little more. He was terrified, not of the memories themselves, though those were bad enough. He was terrified of what would happen if he fully became the Admiral again. That person had done terrible things. Necessary things, perhaps, but terrible nonetheless. That person had sent friends to die, had sacrificed entire squadrons for strategic advantage, had made choices that no human should have to make. The Scourge War had been won because of those choices. Humanity had survived because Elias Vance had been willing to become something more than human, to let the tactical interface merge with his consciousness, until he could command 1,000 ships as easily as moving his own fingers. But the cost had nearly destroyed him. He could not go back to being that person. He would not, even if some part of him, deep inside where the dampeners could not reach, missed it. Missed the clarity. Missed the power. Missed knowing exactly what to do while everyone else was lost. Elias put his head in his hands and tried to remember how to breathe. In 2 weeks, the final evaluation exercise would begin. All senior students would board a decommissioned carrier for a massive war game. Real ships, real weapons, real stakes. He did not know that an enemy fleet was already on its way. He did not know that everything was about to change. He just sat in his room, alone in the dark, fighting a war inside his own head that he was slowly losing. The carrier ship Vigilance hung in orbit above a barren moon, far from any inhabited world. It was old, but still powerful. A warship from an early era that had been stripped of its most dangerous weapons and turned into a floating classroom. For 2 weeks, 300 cadets would live aboard this vessel, running simulations, conducting exercises, and proving they were ready to become officers. Elias stood at one of the observation windows, watching the stars. The ship felt wrong to him. Not the physical sensation, though that was uncomfortable enough. The wrongness was deeper. His instincts, the ones he tried so hard to ignore, were screaming that something was out of place. He pushed the feeling down. He was not an admiral anymore. He was just a student. A bad student. Someone who did not belong here. Kira's squad had been assigned to Deck 7, near the engine section. Their task for the day was simple: run a defensive scenario in one of the simulation rooms. Elias's job was to monitor communications, which meant sitting in a corner and watching screens while everyone else did the actual work. The exercise started normally. Kira commanded from the center of the room, her voice crisp and confident. Vorath led the ground team in the simulation. Marcus handled weapon systems. The Drishan twins managed navigation and sensors. Elias watched numbers scroll across his screen and tried not to think too hard about any of it. Then the lights went out. For 3 seconds, there was total darkness. Then red emergency lights flickered on, casting everything in a bloody glow. Alarms began to wail. The simulation screens went dead, replaced by static. What happened? Marcus demanded. Power failure, one of the twins said. But this should not affect the simulation room. We have independent systems. Kira was already moving toward the door. This is not part of the exercise. Something is wrong. She was right. Something was very wrong. Throughout the vigilance, chaos was spreading. The main engines had shut down. Communications were dead. The FTL drive, the system that allowed faster-than-light travel, had been completely disabled. Most importantly, the Academy instructors who were supposed to be supervising the exercise had all collapsed. Struck down by some kind of targeted neural weapon that only affected those above a certain age. The cadets were alone, and then the ships appeared. They emerged from slipspace, like nightmares given form. 12 warships, each one covered in the twisted organic shapes that marked them as void collected vessels. They surrounded the Vigilance in a perfect formation, their weapons already powered and ready. On every screen and speaker throughout the carrier, a voice spoke. It was not a normal voice. It was thousands of voices speaking together. A chorus of connected minds that had once stretched across a quarter of the galaxy. Attention! Creatures of the Galactic Union, you are now prisoners of the Void Collective. We have disabled your vessel. Your instructors have been neutralized. Your communications are blocked. No help will come. Cadets throughout the ship screamed and ran. Some tried to reach escape pods, but they found the pod bays already sealed. Others tried to send distress signals, but every system was locked. The collective had planned this attack perfectly. The voice continued, and now it seemed almost amused. But we are not here for you. We are here for one person. One human. You know him as a quiet student, a frightened boy who cannot meet your eyes. We know him by another name. On Deck 7, Elias felt his blood turn to ice. We know him as the Silent Hammer, the human who killed our Overmind, the Admiral who burned our fleets at Cygnus Reach. Every cadet on the ship heard these words. Every eye turned toward the nearest human, looking for signs of recognition. On Deck 7, Kira slowly turned to stare at Elias, who had gone completely pale. We have waited 15 years for this moment, Admiral Vance. 15 years to find you. And now we have. We are going to destroy everything you see around you. Every student, every ship, every piece of this floating metal coffin. And you are going to watch. You are going to see these children die, just as our children died when you burned our worlds. And then, when you are the only one left, we will take you apart and learn how such a small creature caused us such great pain. The voice fell silent. The only sound was the wailing of alarms and the distant thunder of the collective ships moving into attack position. In the simulation room, no one moved. Everyone was staring at Elias, the nervous transfer student, the shy boy who could not even look people in the eye. The worst cadet in the academy. Is it true? Kira asked quietly. Elias could not speak. His whole body was shaking. The neural dampeners in his brain were fighting against something enormous, something that had been caged for 15 years and was now slamming against its prison with terrible force. He tried to stay small, tried to stay hidden, tried to be the nothing person he had made himself into, but then he heard screaming from somewhere else on the ship. Young voices, terrified voices. Students dying because an enemy had come looking for him. The dampeners cracked. Elias's hands stopped shaking. His breathing steadied. He stood up straight, and suddenly he seemed taller, as if the hunched posture of the past months had been a disguise. When he opened his eyes, they were different, cold, focused. The eyes of someone who had commanded the largest military operation in human history. Yes, he said, and his voice had changed too. It was calm and quiet, but it carried an authority that made everyone listen. It is true. Admiral Elias Vance had returned. He looked around the room, and his mind was already working, already processing, already seeing patterns and possibilities that no one else could see. The neural interface implants that had been dormant for 15 years were waking up, connecting him to the ship's systems through the tiny traces of technology that even the collective had not been able to block. "The collective has made a mistake," he said. "They came here to watch children die. They came here thinking I was broken and helpless. They were wrong on both counts." He turned to Kira, and for just a moment, something softer appeared in those cold eyes. Something like apology. "I'm sorry I lied to you. I'm sorry for all of it. But right now, I need your help. All of you. We have 300 students on this ship, and an enemy fleet that wants to kill them. The instructors are down. Communications are blocked. No one is coming to save us." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was iron. "So we are going to save ourselves. And we are going to make the Void Collective regret ever coming here." Kira stared at him for a long moment. This was impossible. This stammering, pathetic transfer student could not be the legendary Admiral who had won the Scourge War, could not be the tactical genius that military scholars still studied, could not be the man whose name was spoken with equal parts fear and admiration across the entire galaxy. But she could see it in his eyes. The truth was undeniable. She straightened to attention. "What do you need, sir?" Admiral Vance smiled, and it was not a nice smile. "I need you to trust me. And I need the collective to learn why humanity should never be underestimated." The vigilance was dying. The great carrier groaned as another blast from the collective fleet struck its shields. Hull breaches opened on 3 decks. Fires burned in the cargo bays. Everywhere, cadets were running, screaming, trying to find safety that did not exist. And in the middle of all this chaos, Admiral Elias Vance was calm. His mind had expanded in ways that normal humans could never understand. The neural interface implants, designed to let a single commander control thousands of ships, were now connecting him to every functional system on the Vigilance. He could feel the ship's damage like wounds on his own body. He could sense the enemy fleet's positions through the carrier's broken sensors. He could hear the terrified communications of 300 students through static-filled channels. It was killing him. Every second of this connection pushed his brain past safe limits. Blood had already started dripping from his nose. His hands trembled with strain. But he had burned through worse at Cygnus Reach. And he would burn through worse today. "All cadets. This is Vance. I am assuming tactical command." His voice echoed through every speaker on the ship, cutting through the panic with cold authority. "Squad leaders report to Channel 7. You have 30 seconds. Kira was the first to respond. Then Vorath. Then, after a moment's hesitation, Marcus Chun. Others followed. 20 squad leaders, each commanding between 10 and 20 students. They were children playing at war, but they were all he had. "Listen carefully," Vance said. "The collective has 12 warships. We have 1 damaged carrier with training weapons. They expect us to die. They expect us to scatter and cry and wait to be slaughtered. We are going to disappoint them." He began giving orders. Rapid, precise instructions that seemed random at first, but quickly began to form a pattern. "Squad 3, I need you at Hull Breach 7. Not to repair it, but to prepare for controlled decompression on my signal. Squad 8, gather every training drone from Storage Bay 4. Remove their safety limiters. I need them ready to fly in 6 minutes. Squad 12, access the auxiliary power systems and prepare to reroute all energy to the port thrusters. We are going to move this ship." Kira's squad received special attention. "Selen, your team is my blade. I need you moving through Maintenance Corridor 12 to Boarding Bay 3. The collective is going to send soldiers soon. You are going to be there when they arrive. With what weapons? Kira asked. Training weapons would not stop actual collective soldiers. You will find real weapons in emergency locker. 47C. The code is 7721. The instructors did not think students should know about that locker. A slight pause. I knew about it the first day. The orders kept coming. Every squad, every cadet received specific instructions. Some of the orders seemed insane. One group was told to gather food from the kitchens. Another was told to release fire suppression foam in hallways that were not on fire. A third was told to start playing loud music through certain speakers. Nobody understood the plan. But something about Vance's voice made them obey. 20 minutes later, the collective launched their first boarding pods. 12 metal cylinders, each carrying 20 soldiers, shot toward the Vigilance's hull. The Overmind watched through its fleet's sensors, expecting to see the pods breach the carrier and its soldiers begin the slow work of slaughter. Instead, 5 of the pods missed the ship entirely. They had been aimed at specific hull sections that were no longer there, because Vance had moved the Vigilance using port thrusters exactly when the pods were launched. The remaining 7 pods hit the hull but found their entry points blocked by emergency foam, debris, or deliberately collapsed corridors. Only 2 pods actually delivered soldiers into the ship. They emerged into what they thought would be chaos and confusion. Kira's squad was waiting. The real weapons from emergency. Locker 47C were military grade, designed for worst-case scenarios that the Academy never talked about. Kira had armed her entire team in minutes. Now she watched from the shadows of boarding Bay 3 as collective soldiers poured from their pod, their twisted bodies carrying weapons that had killed thousands. "Wait for it," Vance's voice said in her ear. 3 seconds. 2, 1. Now. She gave the order to fire. Her squad attacked from 3 directions at once, catching the soldiers in a crossfire they never expected. Training had not prepared Kira for actual combat, for the sounds and smells and terror of real battle. But she pushed through it because a voice in her ear told her exactly where to move, when to shoot, and when to take cover. It was like fighting alongside a ghost who could see the future. The first wave of soldiers died in 40 seconds. The second wave, arriving from the other pod, met Varath's squad in a corridor filled with fire suppression foam that blinded their sensors, while the Kalani warriors' forearms wielded weapons with brutal efficiency. The Overmind was surprised. This was not going as planned. Then the drones hit. 300 training drones, normally used for target practice, had been modified by Squad 8 under Vance's precise instructions. Their safety limiters were gone. Their power supplies had been overloaded. They were no longer training equipment. They were missiles. They launched from every bay on the Vigilance, a cloud of small, fast projectiles that would barely scratch a warship's hull. But Vance had not aimed them at the warships. He had aimed them at the warship's sensors, their communication arrays, their weapons targeting systems. 1 drone meant nothing. 300 drones, arriving simultaneously at precise angles calculated by a mind that could see trajectories like other people saw colors, meant chaos. 4 collective ships lost the ability to coordinate their attacks. 2 lost weapons lock entirely. 1, struck in its engine exhaust by a drone traveling at maximum speed, suffered a cascade failure that left it drifting. "Impossible," the Overmind transmitted. "You have no weapons. You have no fleet. You have children." "I have humans," Vance replied calmly. "And you still do not understand what that means." The battle continued. Every minute brought new impossible maneuvers. Vance used the Vigilance's own damage as a weapon, venting atmosphere to push the ship in unexpected directions, using debris from hull breaches as cover and distraction. He turned the carrier's training systems against the collective. flooding their communications with false signals, overloading their sensors with garbage data. When two collective destroyers moved to coordinate an attack run, Vance predicted their exact approach vector. He ordered Squad 3 to decompress Hull Breach 7 at the precise moment the destroyers passed, sending a spray of frozen atmosphere and debris directly into their path. They collided, trying to avoid it. "Trust the geometry," Vance had said when Vorath questioned that order. The Kelani would never doubt him again. Hours passed. The Vigilance was falling apart. 47 cadets had died in the fighting, and every death hit Vance like a physical blow. He felt them through the ship's systems, felt their communications go silent, felt the loss like pieces of himself being torn away. But the collective was losing worse. 6 of their 12 ships were destroyed or disabled. Their boarding parties had been eliminated. Their perfect trap had become a nightmare. And then Vance did something that would be studied in military academies for centuries. He surrendered. "Collective overmind," he transmitted. "I offer myself in exchange for the surviving students. Take me. Let them go." The overmind did not hesitate. This was what they had wanted all along. "Agreed. Lower your shields. Prepare for boarding." Vance turned off the Vigilance's remaining shields. A final collective shuttle approached, carrying soldiers who would take him prisoner. Every cadet on the ship watched in horror as their commander prepared to sacrifice himself. The shuttle docked. The airlock opened. Collective soldiers poured through and found an empty corridor. Vance was not there. He had never intended to be there. The surrender was a trick, designed to make the collective lower their guard for exactly 3 seconds. 3 seconds was enough. During those 3 seconds, the Vigilance's remaining maneuvering thrusters fired at maximum power. The old carrier, already dying, made one final move. It rotated on its axis and rammed its reinforced prow directly into the collective command ship at full speed. The explosion was visible from orbit. "What have you done?" The overmind screamed through every channel. "What I always do," Vance replied, his voice fading as the neural strain finally became too much. "Whatever it takes." He collapsed on the bridge of the broken carrier, surrounded by cadets who had followed him through hell. The remaining collective ships, their overmind disoriented by the loss of the command vessel, fled into slipspace. The battle was over. Against impossible odds, 300 students had survived because one broken man had chosen to be a soldier one more time. Kira found Vance unconscious on the deck, blood streaming from his nose and ears. His eyes were open but empty, his mind retreating from the damage it had sustained. "Medical team," she screamed. "Someone help him." As she held his head in her hands, she realized she was crying. For this stranger who had lied to them all. For this hero who had saved them all. For this broken human who had proven that humanity was more terrifying than any alien fleet had ever imagined. "Stay with us," she whispered. "Please, stay with us." The rescue fleet arrived 6 hours after the battle ended. 40 warships from 3 different species dropped out of slipspace to find the broken hulk of the Vigilance drifting among the wreckage of collective vessels. Emergency beacons were flashing from every deck. Escape pods floated in clouds around the carrier, filled with cadets who had finally been able to evacuate once the enemy fled. Admiral Helena Cross was the first to board. She had been a lieutenant during the Scourge War, one of the few people who had served directly under Elias Vance. When she received the distress signal, she had broken 6 regulations and 2 treaties to reach the system as fast as possible. She found Elias in the medical bay, unconscious and barely alive. The neural strain of commanding for so long had pushed his brain past every safe limit. Doctors were not sure he would ever wake up. "You magnificent, stupid bastard," she whispered, standing over his bed. "We sealed you away for a reason. They came for me." His voice was weak, barely audible. His eyes had opened just a crack. "They were going to kill children. Because of what I did. Because of what you had to do," Elena said firmly. "Because someone had to. And you were the only one who could." He did not respond. His eyes closed again, and the machines around him beeped their concern. The aftermath was complicated. Elias's identity could no longer be hidden. Too many cadets had heard the collective's broadcast. Too many had watched him command the battle. Too many had seen the shy transfer student transform into something legendary. Within hours, his name was spreading across the galaxy. The Galactic Union demanded explanations. How had a human war hero been hidden for 15 years? Why had he been placed at an academy full of children? What was the Terran government trying to accomplish? The Terran government scrambled for answers. They had sealed Elias to protect him, to give him a chance to heal. They had not expected the collective to return. They had not expected any of this. But while politicians argued and diplomats negotiated, something unexpected was happening at the Kethris Institute. The cadets refused to let Elias be taken away again. Kira Solen stood before the Union Council, wearing her academy uniform and carrying herself with all the dignity of her bloodline. She described what she had witnessed during the battle. Not the tactical genius that everyone already knew about. Not the impossible victory that was already being studied by military experts across the galaxy. She described the man. He was terrified, she told the council. I saw it in his eyes when the collective attacked. He did not want to become the Admiral again. He did not want to feel the weight of those decisions. He had spent months hiding from who he was because he thought that person was a monster. She paused, remembering the blood on his face, the trembling of his hands, the way he had apologized to her even as he prepared to save their lives. But when he heard us screaming, when he knew we were going to die, he broke himself open to save us. Not because he had to, not because anyone ordered him to, but because he could not stand by and watch children be slaughtered, even though it cost him everything. Varath testified next. The massive Kalani warrior, whose people had fought humanity in 3 wars before joining the Union, spoke about watching Vance command the battle. In my culture, we measure warriors by their strength and their honor. Elias Vance has more strength than anyone I have ever known. Not because he is physically powerful, but because he carried a burden that would crush most minds, and he carried it anyway. Varath's deep voice filled the council chamber. And his honor? He protected strangers who had treated him poorly. He sacrificed himself for people who had looked down on him. There is no greater honor than that. Even Marcus Chun spoke. The human who had resented Elias for making their species look weak now stood before the council and admitted he had been wrong. I was ashamed of him, Marcus said. I thought he was an embarrassment to humanity. I could not have been more wrong. He showed me what it really means to be human. Not the strength to fight, but the strength to care. Not the pride of victory, but the courage to protect the weak even when you are afraid. One by one, cadets who had survived the battle added their voices. They told stories of how Vance's orders had saved their lives. They described the moment when a mumbling transfer student had become something else entirely. They spoke of watching him collapse on the bridge, his body broken but his spirit undefeated. The Union Council listened. And for the first time in years, they were moved. The vote was unanimous. Elias Vance would not be hidden away again. He would not be sealed or silenced or treated as a weapon to be stored until needed. He would be allowed to choose his own path. 3 months later, Elias stood at the window of his new apartment, watching the sunset over the Kethris campus. His body had healed mostly. His mind was still fragmented in places, still scarred by the strain of the battle. He would never be quite the same as he was before, either the broken student or the cold Admiral, but he was alive. And for the first time in 15 years, he felt something like hope. A knock came at his door. Kira stood there, wearing civilian clothes for once, holding a box of files. "The Academy sent these," she said. "They want to know if you will accept the position." Elias looked at the files. Course materials, student records, teaching schedules. The Kethris Institute had offered him a job as an instructor in advanced tactical theory. "I am not a very good teacher," he said quietly. "I get nervous. I forget names. I am probably going to be terrible at this." "Probably," Kira agreed with a slight smile. "But I think you should do it anyway." He took the files. He thought about the cadets who had followed him through impossible odds. He thought about all the things he knew, all the lessons he had learned through blood and fire and sacrifice. Maybe those lessons could help someone else. Maybe he could teach young officers how to protect people without destroying themselves in the process. Maybe. Instead of being a weapon, he could be a guide. The new semester began on a bright morning in early spring. The Kethris Institute auditorium was packed with students from 100 worlds, all waiting to see the legendary Admiral who had defeated the Void Collective twice. Elias walked to the podium slowly. He still moved awkwardly sometimes. He still flinched at unexpected sounds. The neural damage would never fully heal, but his eyes were clear. His voice, when he spoke, was steady. "My name is Elias Vance. Some of you know my history. Some of you are afraid of it. That is okay. I was afraid of it too." He paused, looking out at the young faces before him. "I am going to be teaching advanced tactical theory this semester. I am not a very good speaker. I get nervous easily. I will probably forget your names." A slight smile crossed his face. "But if you are willing to learn, I will teach you everything I know. How to protect the people who matter. How to find victory in impossible situations." His voice hardened just slightly, a ghost of the silent hammer surfacing for a moment. "And how to make anyone who threatens the innocent regret it for the rest of their very short lives." The auditorium exploded with applause. In the front row, Kira leaned over to Varth, who had returned to the academy to complete his final year. "Still think he is pathetic?" The Kalani warrior shook his massive head. There was something like awe in his eyes, and perhaps a little fear. "I think that humanity is absolutely terrifying, and I'm very glad you are our allies." Kira grinned. She looked at the former Admiral, now Professor, who stood at the podium accepting applause he had never wanted and probably still did not think he deserved. She thought about everything she had learned in the past months, about strength and weakness, about hiding and revealing, about what it meant to be broken and what it meant to be whole. And she thought about what it meant to be human, a species that had come to the stars late, that had been dismissed as weak and primitive, that had been underestimated by every older civilization in the galaxy. A species that produced people like Elias Vance, fragile and strong, terrified and brave, broken and unbeatable. As the applause continued, Kira whispered words that would become a saying among the cadets of Kethris, passed down from class to class for generations. Humanity. Fuck yeah. And somewhere, watching through sensors hidden in the dark between stars, the remnants of the Void Collective heard rumors of the Admiral's return. They remembered the fire that had consumed their fleet. They remembered the voice that had calmly orchestrated their destruction. And for the first time in their long existence as a collective consciousness, they felt something they had never felt before. Fear. Because now they understood that, as long as humans existed, there would always be another Elias Vance, another quiet soul hiding impossible strength, another broken person who could become something terrible and wonderful when the moment demanded it. The Void Collective made a decision. They would never attack human space again. They would never threaten human allies. They would avoid humanity entirely, forever, until the stars. themselves burned out. It was the smartest decision they had ever made. And in the auditorium of the Kethris Institute, a former admiral who had never wanted to be a hero began his first lesson, teaching a new generation how to protect the galaxy. The Silent Hammer had finally found peace, but if anyone ever threatened his students, they would learn very quickly that his hammer could still fall.